Excited to have Coach Meeks here with us from Canada Basketball. He's the men's basketball operations with Canada Basketball as the assistant general manager role with the national team program. He was just recently here in Winnipeg about 3 weeks ago hosting the Junior Academy male tryouts with Coach Dan Becker and our coaching staff. His main focus with Canada Basketball is to support the men's basketball program and to seek out the next generation of national team talent. Coach Meeks is going to be getting more specific into some basketball pieces. His topic here is going to be loading your basketball drills for game results. Coach, you should have the ability to share a screen on your side. And if you do have that option, if you have any sound in your video, there should be a checkbox to turn on sound when you share your screen. If you do, if you don't, that's no need to check that. So, but Coach, thanks for joining us. We're going to turn things over to you, and that's going to take us to the into the noon range here in Winnipeg, at least. And thanks for being part of us today.
No, once again, thanks for having me. Following Gordy is not the easiest act. The man just won a World Cup, so but I'm going to do my best here. And fun fact, I actually played for Gordy, played against Gordy as a player. Coached with him and coached against him as a coach when I was overseas. And, the great thing about him, I think, and one of his best strengths is his ability to just make things black and white. The goals that he sets for each individual player and his teams are always very attainable. Like his processes that lead to success are simple. It's things that a lot of players and assistants and just people around him can buy into really easily. I think that's one of his greatest strengths. And one of the interesting things about his time with us in the previous quad, I remember one of the first times we came together and we were putting like the depth chart together. And, when he says like player 10, 11, 12 are important, like he really means that. It's actually one of the first things he really looks for is like, who are those blue collar guys? Who's going to get on the floor for a loose ball? Who's going to get the big defensive stop at the end of the game? And, who's bringing the grit to the table? Like he purposefully seeks those kind of players out. And if you watched this past summer how Germany competed, they were all of those things. So it's just was an honor to coach with him and play for him, and obviously the success that he's had has been great as well. And thanks for the introduction there, Adam. As Adam said, I work with Canada Basketball. I've been working with CB since 2015. I'm now the assistant general manager, but yeah, talent ID, youth development, I oversee those programs, see what I'm discussing. So loading your drills for game results, and this will be very high level. I'm not going to get into the minutia and the little definitions and idiosyncrasies of actual components that lead to that, but we'll have some thoughts and my thoughts on kind of some overarching themes that really aid in the development of players and getting them to compete at a certain level and perform at a certain level in games. I have the privilege of being able to get into a lot of gyms in our country, whether it be a grassroots, kids under the age of 10, or our senior team practices or NBA practices, college practices, high school practices. I've watched a lot of really good coaching throughout all those different environments. And then there's some things that are pretty consistent in terms of the coaches that do a great job of developing players to play at the next level and perform at the next level. And then some consistencies in terms of, maybe a critique for the ones that could like change the way they implement certain things. Before we get started, just to kind of like build a frame of reference and get everybody on the same page. What is skill? A lot of times when you're talking to coaches or watching a practice or you're evaluating athletes, you'll hear, oh, this athlete is skilled and this athlete is not skilled, or more skilled and less skilled. So what is that? And just a kind of generic definition, skill is the ability to do something well, right? Dribbling is a skill, shooting is a skill, running is a skill, right? Passing is a skill. These are usually the fundamental things, and just a few of them that kind of drive the game, right? And if anybody disagrees, put in the chat. What is technique, right? So a way of carrying out a particular task, variation in performing specific skills. So skill is dribbling, change of direction, crossover, between the legs, behind the back, change of speed, hesitation, stop, goes. Those are all things that are techniques that could be, improved upon that allow you to execute certain skills in certain situations. Shooting, for example, as well. Catch and shoot versus pull-ups, floaters, things along those lines. Okay, so what is the goal of overall for coaches in terms of developing players, putting drills in place? For me, I think one of the most important things is, you're trying to achieve is performance on demand, right? So executing the correct skill at the right time in varying situations, and getting positive outcomes, right? You want to prepare players to, when the shot clock is running out and they're open and the ball gets swung to them, does the skill of shooting the ball and the technique of being able to plant your feet in a certain way, and have you had the repetitions of watching the ball go in the net and making those shots count, right? Performance on demand. So this is one of my favorite quotes, and probably the foundation of how I kind of undertake developing an athlete, or implementing changes to their game that's going to make them successful in competition. It's give a man a fish and you feed him for a day, teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. And when we're developing athletes, I think there's a lot of times you see repetitive exercises, repetitive drills, and the coaches are kind of putting things in the training environment that do allow athletes to attain a certain level of performance when it comes to performing those skills, or results when performing those skills, but they almost hold the hand of the athlete a little bit too much and don't allow enough, or create enough of a challenging environment to kind of allow that athlete to become the best version of themselves. Like the ego of the coach a lot of time gets in the way. And that's always a fine balance, I think, is really trying to, make sure that the environment that you create for development is allowing that athlete to become the best version of themselves, and that they can kind of put their hands on the wheel of the bus and drive it for themselves without having to have somebody steer it for them. So when I'm working with young players, it's really challenging them and asking them questions and putting them in scenarios to develop that ability to understand things, and how all the blocks kind of fit together when it comes to performing. All right. Loading drills is the art of coaching and good player development, right? And as coaches, it's important that you kind of stay cutting edge, do your research, get into different environments, and see how certain things are done. I'll be honest, when it comes to ball handling, there's always, something new that's coming up, and you kind of stay in your certain wheelhouse. But for the way the game is played today, it doesn't take much, just a little Google search, and you will have a list of, I don't know, tens and dozens of static drills, dynamic drills that could be loaded, that you could add to your toolbox as a coach. And then there's the ability of being able to increasingly raise the level or the challenge of how drills are performed for the players so that they don't kind of plateau, right? All right, so some keys to loading drills. Plan of progression, right? Plan of progression. And along with that, I would also say that you need to have a plan, and especially for today's athlete, individualized plan, right? Performance. And you're going to base it on either what you're seeing in the game, in their games, in practices, scenarios, and gameplay, things that you're trying to move that individual into be able to have them accomplish when they're on the court. Having it, writing it down, tracking it. I think a lot of athletes today really respond well to kind of having things that are tangibly in front of them. So whether it be showing them video of their, form shooting so that they can see, because especially at the age that the athlete is, you might say, hold your follow through or straighten your wrist or whatever the feedback is. But for that athlete, he or she might feel like their wrist is straight and they are holding it. So actually showing them and putting it down is something that they have to improve, and putting it in writing is a great way to hold them accountable to achieving improvement in certain skills and development. Constantly increase the pressure to challenge athletes, right? And I think this is probably, again, speaking to the art, knowing when to increase the pressure to challenge athletes is important. Knowing how to increase the pressure is important. And it's kind of like, the gray area, or the art is knowing just how deep a pool to put that athlete in so that they could constantly just keep their head above the water. If an athlete's constantly improving, chances are it's a matter of time before they could take those skills and the things they're trying to execute into the game. If they ever get to a level of plateauing, you don't want to plateau and never get to a certain standard of efficiency. So yeah, constantly increasing the pressure to challenge athletes. Error detection and correction. This is an area where, for me personally, I think you want to keep it consistent. And I'm going to use shooting because I think that's just one of the more important aspects of the game today, and it's easy. Everybody is constantly worried about their shooting mechanics and being able to do that efficiently. But you can almost give too much information, right? You want to keep things simple. You want to make sure you have points of emphasis that are clear, and you want to make sure that the things that you're asking the athlete to do, the athlete's able to actually perform them, right? So when do you correct something, and how do you correct it? And then what's in place to detect when mistakes are being made, and how well does that athlete understand those things? Okay. Progressions. Okay, so I think for the most part, I kind of kept these very simple. But when you're talking about uh, putting together drills, right? You could have drills that are on air, and you see the example there, just ball handling. There's no defense. There's no pressure. There's no time. Maybe there's a count. There's an attempt amount or makes amount, but there's really nothing other than the basic fundamental skill that's being performed without a defender or a situation in front of them. Guided, and with guided defense, that could be anywhere from being, like a human pylon, to just changing your feet in terms of the direction that you want the athlete to dribble in, or full on, you're trying to rip the ball out of the player's hands and block their shots and things along those lines. So that's what a guided defensive drill is. And then the game-like situations, right, and decisions. All right, so on air, it's great in the early stages of development and acquiring new skills and techniques. Make sure you're aiming for good reps, good repetitions. With on air, you're constantly trying to create good habits. And again, repeatable things that the athlete can kind of lock into and hone in on, so that they can have that repeated success of performing the skill, right? The goal, and you could get as tight with the critique as you want, but with my experience, it's always better to kind of like, as they progress and develop during that pathway of becoming more efficient at a skill, you start to tighten up the things that you're looking for in terms of their execution. Creating good habits, and I think that's a thing that gets overlooked. Form shooting, everybody does it, but if you notice an athlete is taking shots, and every time there's a miss, it's kind of like, oh, they're grimacing, and there's frustration. That's a habit. That's a habit, and mentally they're putting themselves in a bad place. So creating a good habit would be just not worrying about the miss, concentrate on the technique, breathe, things along those lines. Narrow the focus and the points of emphasis. So an athlete shooting, again, is the example, they might have 50 things wrong with their shots. Feet aren't pointed right, shoulder, wrist, follow through, shooting pocket, right? You don't want to be giving them information about changing all of those things. Narrow it down. It's on air. There's no defense. Pick one or two things that they got to focus on. And when they can, repeat those things without error, then add something else to the mix. On-air drills are great for maintaining form and technique. You could load this drill or these drills with time and pressure, right? You could even put a tiny bit of guided defense in there just to get the form and the technique the way it should be. You could also set goals such as makes and or attempts, and or makes and attempts with a time limit, right? Those are on-air drills. Are there any questions? Because I'm going to ramble on. There are some videos at the end of this, and we can go in. I'll show you some examples. All right, there's one question. Narrowing the focus and points of emphasis. When you are regarding shooting, what would you say are those rate determining steps, the first things you would try to correct for someone who has many things wrong with their shooting? Okay, Great. So, okay, Steve, we'll get to you next. You could write your question in the thing, and I'll get to it. So with shooting, and we could talk about that. It really depends on what the issue is, and yeah, when we go a little bit further ahead, I get into error detection a little bit more deeper. But the crux of what you're trying to understand with a shooter is like the issue of why they're missing. What is the root cause of it? Are they is it falling short? Is it going to the right? Is it going to the left? And this becomes very, there's a lot of links in the chain that could cause all of those things. And as a good developer, a good coach, you want to understand how all these things play a role in the outcome that you're seeing, and then you want to just remedy those situations one by one. So let's say it's a situation where their shot constantly goes to the left. I'm looking at where their feet pointing, where their hips pointing, where their shoulders pointing, and where's their follow through pointing. So if the follow through is straight, the toes are straight, the shoulders are straight, but for some reason the hips are tilted to the left, then for me, I would try to get them to square their hips a little bit, right? So that's just an example of how you would narrow the focus. Now you don't, if they have all of the above going to the left, then one by one, you have to make sure they can keep the toes straight, the hips straight, the shoulders straight, and again, there are different philosophies in terms of how a shot or mechanically should look. I think there's a spectrum of what is a functional shot and what is a non-functional shot. And I think a lot of coaches, especially when it comes to shooting, they get caught up with their ideals, and instead of the athlete doesn't have a problem getting the shot off in a game against great pressure, and they're shooting it at a high clip. So whatever, low 40s for a 3-point shooter. I've seen coaches in this scenario go in and tweak a shot, and that player goes from shooting 40%, making shots in game, good attempts, to like high 20s. And now they got to work their way back up, learning new techniques and things like that to appease their coach. This is one of those fine areas of is it an appropriate thing that you need to error correct if the result that you want in the game is there already, right? So don't overcorrect those things. Just maybe a subtle tweak, especially for today's athlete. They're constantly playing. They rarely have time to just sit there and work on their shots. They're constantly in I need to make it mode. Great question. Next one, does putting time or pressure on a player when they are doing the repping on air change the player's focus? If so, what are some of the ways where we can still put the extra pressure on the player, but not have the impact the player's focus on the specific skill being focused on? Okay, so this is a great question. And again, a very nuanced thing that you have to try to navigate as a coach. If the technique is there, and now you got to think, like, it's not that on-air drills are less important than, let's say, guided drills. On-air drills are very important. At different stages, you can drive different kind of outcomes. To learn the actual technique, you need on-air drills especially in the beginning stage. Once an athlete has the ability, and their technique is relatively good, or where you need it to be, now it's just amount of time of now it's just about increasing the repetitions that they're taking, right? Because they know that their follow through needs to look this way, and their shoulders are pointed this way, and their feet are pointed this way, and they can do it over and over again. The ball may or may not go in, but if their technique is where it needs to be, you can increase the amount of repetitions that they're taking. The other thing you could do is put a time limit on it. So they have to make, they have 1 minute and they have to have 22 attempts from three, and they have to make above 16. So you put some goals in those areas. That puts them under pressure, but it's still an on-air drill, right? But now can they perform that skill with the pressure of time being a factor, which is more similar to in the game, right? At the speed that you want them to be able to execute it. And I think you also asked, you could still put extra pressure on them. Yeah, it's just about efficiency at that point. So maybe it's 10 reps, and you have to make 70%, 80% of your shots. But your technique needs to be the right technique. So if it's the technique is off, then that rep doesn't count. That's another way you could add pressure without a time, for example. Hope that answers your question. So with guided defense, it's you guys can probably see this. I'll just close the Q&A. So this is where now you're getting into more benefit for intermediate level players, right? So players that the fundamental skills, they could, dribble a basketball without looking at it. The technique is at a certain level. Now you could add a defender, you could add guided defense, which again is now bringing it more into a game-like scenario, right? Prepare to get physical. I think this is where a lot of coaches today in our environment, especially the ones that are coaching younger athletes, you're limited by resources. How many coaches do you have on staff? How much opportunity do you have to bring in practice players that could, play guided defense, and their ability to play guided defense, their size for position, their agility on the defensive end to turn ball handlers. If you go into an NBA gym practice scenario, whether it be for any NBA athlete, preseason, during the season, postseason, they constantly have that guy or that trainer that is able to, put the scenario, that defender that they see in the game every day in front of them and have them go through those workouts. So you got to prepare to get physical. You have to have, it helps when you have size for the position. That's one of the things I think that kind of are allowing athletes to kind of get to a certain level very, very early. And when you really think about it, as a coach, if you have a player in front of you and you're the only coach that player can get in front of, that player is only going to get as good as you can load that drill, right? So obviously you have all the tricks and tools to load it on air, but now with the guided defense, that's going to separate good from great. Like great coaches are just able to just, consistently apply defensive pressure or guided pressure to the point of making it game-like. This is, in essence, this is the golden ticket. You have to challenge the players today to keep them engaged, right? If you overdo it, they lose confidence. If you underdo it, they get bored or they plateau. So I think for a lot of athletes, you'll see them kind of get to a certain level of training with a certain coach, and then they're going to go look for the next coach that could, raise their stock or raise their ability to perform or execute a skill because the other athletes in the gym are better, or that coach and the coach's resources to put more people in place to make the drills challenging is greater, right? With guided defense, you want to make it situational, right? Whether it be a pick and roll drill, a finishing drill, a shooting drill, make it situational. make it relate to the things that the athlete is going to have to do in the game, right? And then with the decisions within those situations, you script them. So if it's pick and roll ball handler in a side ball screen scenario, you're going to want them to practice against the ice, right? Keeping the ball on the sideline. So you need defenders and you need a situation for them. And then you're telling them exactly what defense is being played. That's kind of guiding them and then scripting it. Any questions before I go further? I think there's one in the chat right now. Does putting time or pressure on a player? Okay, we answered that one already. Next slide. Sorry. Game-like situations and decisions. Okay, now that you've installed some techniques on air, you've brought them through some guided, scripted scenarios. Now it's about having them take that skill in a situation where it's a little bit more live and it's unscripted. Things can happen a little bit more random in terms of the pressure that's being applied, right? We're talking about decisions, right? So can they make decisions on their own without the coach kind of holding their hands? And you can do this with changing the pressure, changing the type of defense that's being played, advantage games, whether it be one-on-one advantage games or 3v2 lopsided games, small games. Like there's a lot of ways to kind of create game-like scenarios. When you're going through these scenarios, the reads, right? The reads when you're coming off a pin down screen, what are the different things that an athlete is likely to see in terms of the defense that's being played, right? If they're overplayed, backdoor, if the defender's on the outside shoulder, maybe you're going to curl. If the defender's being physical, you're going to go shoulder to shoulder and continue and things along those lines. And the caveat again is like in the guided defense, if the situation is too challenging, the player can potentially lose confidence. And if it's not challenging enough, they'll get bored. Okay, we kind of covered this a little bit, but error detection and correction, and nothing kind of frustrates me more than just watching a coach work with an athlete and it's just constant. Nope, stop, do it. Nope, stop, do it again. No. And the player never gets to kind of work through things and understand what it did. A lot of times, especially if you're dealing with a young athlete, they don't understand the mistakes that are being made. I have an example of a player who, functional movement was an issue. So just in our warm-up, in the dynamic warm-up before our sessions, that player had trouble kind of, touching their toes without rounding their shoulders and hunching their back. And I was like, you need to straighten your back. And then they would kind of go down, and again, their back would be hunched and rounded. And I'm like, no, you need to straighten your back when you bend over. And then it dawned on me that they didn't realize that their back was hunched. They just kept on repeating the same mistake over. So then I took a photo of them touching their toes. And when I showed the photo, the eyes just lit up. They were like, oh my goodness, I thought my back was straight, but I had no idea. And then from that point on, you could kind of get them to understand and correct the thing that you want them to execute, right? But if you get to a point where it's constantly the same mistake over and over again, you have to get into the mind of that athlete and make sure that they really understand what you're asking of them, and they understand what it is that their bodies are doing at that specific time. A lot of times with another example is, a lot of times you can sit at a game, and let's say they're like U12, and the guards are bringing up the ball, and the coach is like, pass it, pass it, pass it. Those ages, their peripheral vision isn't even developed, so they could probably only focus on the things that are kind of, in a narrow range in front of their eyes. But, without knowing that, you don't kind of drill them putting their head on a swivel while ball handling, so that they can just, be able to mitigate games until their peripheral vision widens, right? Certain things like that. And that kind of brings me to the next point, which is make sure you understand the root or the cause of the error, because it could be a lot of those things, right? The way that you explained it, physical limitations of that actual individual, right? This is probably one of the most, yeah, I would say it's the most consistent in terms of young, tall players. And you'll see, 15 years old, physically late mature, not an early mature, no explosive power, no agility. But the coach is like putting him in situations, and they're like, dunk the basketball, dunk the basketball. You got to understand that, you could ask them a million times, but until their body's actually ready to do that, it's almost futile to some extent. And what the focus should have been at that time is potentially teaching them how to load properly, catch the ball, protect it, be able to power up while it's protected. Those are things that you could nip in the bud before they're actually physically able to get in their head above the rim to be able to dunk it. And then when the explosive power is developed, they've been in the weight room a little bit, and things are starting to fall into place, they're doing it with the right technique, right? With error detecting, think more process than outcome a lot of times, because that will help an athlete better understand what you're trying to get them to do. Don't be afraid to take a step back if things are, I think everyone develops on their own timeline. You could bucket athletes together, and it helps when you don't have too many varying athletes in a set of drills. Try to group them where they're relatively close, and then you can load the drills accordingly, rather than having one kind of be way in the deep end and another one being way in the shallow end. So group them, and then don't be afraid to take a step back, right? You'll see athletes sometimes get to a point where they're just not able to execute the thing you're asking. Take a step back, and then maybe potentially find another way to get them going the direction you need them to go in. Then big time, video today is almost essential. I find 9 times out of 10, when you show an athlete what it needs to look like, when you show an athlete how they're performing and what the skills they're trying to performing look like, it's the quickest way to get them to make changes. The quickest way, right? The other thing is ask questions. I put that there because, a lot of times athletes get into situations and they're trying to do something, and they come to you and they're like, coach, how do I do this? And a lot of times the coach will be like, oh, you do step A, step B, step C. Another way to kind of go about it is asking them, well, what do you think you need to do in order to get that done? And then they'll try something, and then you go back to them, and then you say, well, how did that work? Yeah, that wasn't good. All right, so what else can we try? And then they try something else, and then they come back to you, and you're like, well, how did that feel? Oh, that felt better, coach. All right, let's go with that then. And then, hopefully, as with your experience, you can you can add on to things like that and have them, again, put their hands on the wheel and drive the bus a little bit. Adam, can you watch the, if a question comes up, I'll just deal with it right away and just let me know. Okay, so we have a question here. Overly aggressive guided defense to try to make players work through foul activity and try to simulate working through bad officiating. What are your thoughts? Man, that's a sensitive one for me. Ryan, that's a sensitive one for me. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like you see this a lot. Finishing drills, right? Couple things with finishing drills, and this is a pet peeve for me. I'm going to throw it out there, and if we could have a little dialogue about this. And we've probably all seen it, right? There's a coach standing at a rim, and he's padded up, like pad on one arm, a pad on the other arm, and the player is like driving to the basket, and then they're going shoulder to shoulder, and then the coach is whacking him on the arm, and the player's trying to finish, and they're, miss. Player backs up, and then again, miss. Player backs up, and then again, finish. And then, like, at some point, it needs to dawn on that coach or trainer, after you whack them on the arm, the next thing you should be doing is like saying, go take a free throw. Because that's what's going to happen in the game. That's not necessarily game-like. Like, nobody gets away with playing defense like that. And you're going to see some examples, I promise. It's not just me ranting, but maybe I should have put videos earlier. But you'll see some videos of how we, in our practices, guide. And I think it's that in itself, being a good guided defender is almost as tough as becoming a really good player, because you have to understand what is realistic pressure in a game, right? The other thing that bugs me about those scenarios is when there's a defender at the rim, like ready to contest your shot, like either it's LeBron James and you're finishing over top of them, or you need to be making a pass in those situations. Like, it's not a good scenario to go. Unless it's a scenario of there's 2 seconds on the clock and you need to go to the basket, like that's what you're working on. But to answer, I hope I answered that question. I'm not a big fan of those kind of drills, and there's rarely a scenario where it applies, right? Okay. Okay. So here's a progression, right? I just put a little bit of some things that, and these are just images I sourced from our camps. But in the first one, you'll see something on air. And this is on air, even though there's a coach kind of standing there. Zach is about to like catch the ball, and then he's going to, turn and make a jump hook, or maybe it's just a swing pass to the opposite side, whatever the case may be. But you can have a little bit of guided defense on your on-air drills, right? Very token, very easy. The next one is guided. And here it is, like, so in this particular situation, I remember this was this summer, and Zach had an issue of kind of like when he would square up or tee up on a defender in his post situation, he would just drop the ball just a little bit. So it's a habit, right? Because on-air drills, like the first one, when you don't have a coach there, you watch guys form shoot, and you could tell that they aren't envisioning what the defender is going to be doing, swiping at the ball. Where is the defender standing while I'm taking this shot? And especially with young players and developing players that aren't, haven't gotten to that stage of being able to execute skills at a certain level, or they haven't played against good enough defenders that are actually going to capitalize on the bad habits that they have, right? They will, when the pressure's on in the games, they'll resort to what they practice 1,000 times. So Coach Tacky, going back to your question, if you're having 500 repetitions and you're not, and you're bringing the ball down when you tee up, you have to be able to perform those repetitions in a game-like fashion, right? So here I am, I'm just holding his shoulder because I'm like he's about to turn and drop the ball. And if he was to turn and drop the ball, I would just smack it out of his hands and he would never complete that rep, right? So he's not going to get a bad rep in this scenario. After a drill like this, then at the end, here they are, it's Kyle Alexander versus Zach in a one-on-one game, right? Where we're allowing the catch to go inside. The other thing, and that last picture kind of just reminded me of something. When I was in college, I played for John Beeline at Canisius, great coach, great development mind. We didn't have a lot of coaches that could go into drills, and the way things were done back then were more like you taught the players to play, for lack of better terms, quote unquote, dummy defense, right? So you had to allow things to happen and take place, which is also part of a guided scenario. But if you don't have resources where you can have coaches just play a specific way, kind of like I am in the middle one, then you have to have reps where the players are able to play the defense you need them to play. The caveat with that is if it's an offensive drill, you don't want to error correct the defense. Like defense can do whatever they want to do in a certain boundary, but it's really you're going to focus on the technique of the offensive player, or vice versa. It's a defensive drill. Offense is going to try to go middle, and the defense has to try to keep the offense to the baseline. The other thing with guided defense, and I might have mentioned this before, is just having someone, close to the size of the defender that the athlete is going to face in the game. That's very beneficial. There's not a lot of guys Zach's height, but we had Boniface Endong, who's pretty much a 7-footer, 7+ wingspan, and then myself in the odd occasion would be able to get behind them and mix it up with them a little bit. Okay, is there another question, or is that the same one?
No, there's nothing in there right now, Mike. So coaches,
okay.
If you have more questions, please put in the Q&A. And I have a few myself. I'll add in myself that have come to me in a different mode. So but carry on.
Okay. Mike. All right. So then, and here you see them on air, right? Guided physical, game-like situations. And then there he is in the game, keeping the ball nice and high, where the athlete the defender can't get to it, and he's able to execute and finish. Here's another situation. And here's another thing to focus on is making sure they're taking shots in the areas that they're going to get them in the game. Here in the first photo, you see our coach, and he's just kind of off them, just making sure that they're sharp. If they were to expose the ball in a certain way, maybe you tap it or maybe you reach for it so that they tuck it in, and then that rep is a great game rep, right? And then if you look at the middle photo, we're simulating a drive where you have a defender on your hip and you're trying to, execute a finish to the last one where you're seeing it in the game with Shea with the defender hand on the hip, right? So there's no pads, right? There's no pads. There's nobody whacking him or pulling his arm or hanging off his back or, putting something for him to jump over. You see it all. When you're in the environment, you see it all. But the reps that translate to the game are the game-like ones, right? Like this. And this one here, hand down, we're going to shoot it. He's in his spot. Here, there's like a little bit of pressure. There's a little bit of hand checking, right? And it replicates what the athletes are going to have to see in the game. Here's another example of shooting, right? On air, everybody does this, just game reps. Now we have our coach with an extended hand challenging every shot. So now they have a little pressure of a body closing out to them. That becomes a familiar feeling for them. They're able to put themselves in a game-like mode. In this situation, maybe it's an open catch and shoot, but in this situation, it's like the majority of shots that usually happen in a game, it's being contested. And then the last slide, you see contested shot in a game that Nikhil probably made. Okay, so we're going to get into some videos now, but before I get into the videos and the examples, might be a good time for some more questions. I think there's one. Oh, do you feel bigs develop later because of their size, strength, and agility? Yes, yes, and yes. And you got to think it's not necessarily just those are the components that will take longer for them to develop. But in terms of skill, an interesting thing, and you'll see it's rare that you'll see a young tall player like age 15 be a really great shooter. Like they usually don't start becoming efficient shooters until about 18. And it's just when you hear the reason, it's pretty obvious, but it's because their arms are growing at a pretty rapid rate. There's if you guys know who Charles Bediako is, he was a starting center at Alabama for the last couple of years, and then now he's with the San Antonio Spurs trying to make it into the NBA. So when he was 14 years old, he was 6'7" with a 6'8" wingspan. Now by the time he was 18, so within 4 years, he was 7 foot with a 7'4" wingspan. Right. So every year it's like 2 inches on his arms going that way. And he's trying to kind of like hone in on his shot mechanics. Like from 18 on is where you could start to expect the efficiency to increase in terms of how many shots they're making, because their arms just aren't growing 2 inches in a year. Right. And it's the same thing for like explosive power. That's usually about 17, 18 for a lot of tall players. If you see an explosive tall player at the age of 14, 15, 16, and let's say they're like 6'5", 6'6", that probably means they're not growing as much. It's very rare that they're going to become a 7-footer. They might become, if they're 6'5", they might become 6'7", but if they're 6'5", they're not going to become 7 foot. Very rare. Hope that answers your question. Would you say that in-game errors or errors during game-like situation practice tell us that we need to go back to on-air or guided practice? It could be both, right? In-game error. And it depends, again, it depends on the error and what the root of that error is. And I'll give you an example. If it's a ball screen, for example, and the ball handler is not able to, hit the right side corner when the defense tags from the low right side, right? They're not able to hit it, right? They could hit the left corner, they could hit the roller, but they just can't get the ball to the right corner. Well, you got to understand why that is. Is it a visual thing where they just can't see? Is it, do they have neck impingement and they can't turn their head that way? Can they pass with their left hand? Right. So depending on what that is going to determine what that player needs to kind of focus on. Is that player just not realizing where the tag is coming from? Right. So if it's that, then you might want to put them in a situation where it's an advantage game 3 against 2, and the tag has to either guard the roller or there's a person in right-hand corner standing there, right? And that defender is either taking the roller or he's taking the corner, and that ball handler now has to make a play, right, and make a read. If it's a left-handed thing, then now it's about, putting a defender, a guided defender on their right hip with pressure with their offhand, and then they're driving with their left hand, making hook passes to the corner, and they're getting a lot of repetitions just passing the ball, right? So it could be all of those things. You're welcome. All right, we'll go into some videos here. Hopefully you guys can see it. So this is just a video of Shea and Nikhil before a game or before a practice. Actually, it's at the end of a practice, and they're just getting on-air reps, right? And I love this video because when they get the ball back, and you look at their body, you look at their eyes, and you look at their technique. It's repetitive, but look at Shea's face. He's looking. There's a defender right in front of him. You could almost see the defense that's being played, the jab step to get him to create space, and then the follow through and the release, which is pretty consistent, right? Older players have the ability to do this because they've been in game scenarios and in those situations over and over. A player that's just learning how to dribble and shoot won't be able to have an on-air rep like this, but this is the goal, right? And this is where I'm saying, like, teaching them a fish versus giving them a fish. You want them to be able to envision that defender, right? Put themselves in the moment of the game. It's really tough when they have never experienced it, but that is the goal of loading those drills, right? So on air, whether you're doing it at the beginning of a practice or at the end of a practice, look at how that athlete is performing. One of the things I love to do is just watch an athlete when they walk into the gym and they pick up the ball. Like, what are they doing, and how are they doing it, right? Are they going through the motions, or are they envisioning defenders here? I'm going to protect the ball, keep it here on this finish. My form shooting, there's a defender, step back, hesitation, the defender's coming, and you could see Shea manipulating the defender in that on-air drill. Okay, now here's a situation where our coaches now are scripting the defense and guide, right? So there's a drive to the baseline. We have to make the right read to for the kick. We swing it, and then there's a catch and shoot scenario with a light contest for one of our best shooters, and they got to make that shot. And these are the kind of shooting drills we do the majority of the time, right? You can watch it again. Right, the coach rotates, a little hesitation, so he's working on his passing, right? Pass goes through, he makes the read on the kick, he's guarded, we get a drive kick, a swing, and then a lightly contested shot. Here's another scenario, again with our coaches, and you can see our coaches here on defense. So RJ has the ball and he's passing out of a ISO situation, almost a post up where he's swinging to the weak side. And now Dylan is driving against a bad closeout, right? And he's kicking it to RJ, who's now swinging it to the open man for a shot. And coach is just putting a hand up like a late contest, right? These are the reps our guys are getting. Now, you can't get 50 of those reps, right? But all those components that lead into that shot going in, the drive, the pass, the read on the kick, like those are scripted and guided by our coaches. Here's a ball screen scenario, or sorry, a handoff. Defender goes under and it's an automatic screen and roll. pocket pass, right? And now here's the finish. And this is what I was talking about. Like, that's great guided defense. And that's, how can I say this? That's really good, bad defense, right? Because when you're defended poorly, like this is the kind of finish that you make. There isn't a pad. Nobody's whacking him out of the air. You know, it's very, very game-like. I think we got another rep of Melvin here. So Melvin sets the screen. He pops. Comes into a DHO. And now the defender is going under, rescreening. His defender's in a drop. We got to deliver the pocket. And he could go in for a layup. All right. Last one here, and I think it's the same situation. Handoff for Zach into a rescreen. And then you notice the defense being played on the ball handler here. I'll try to rewind it. But Connor Griffin, he works with the Denver Nuggets. He does a great job of just being able to play guided defense. The poke at the ball by the coach so that Zach could protect it and go up and finish it. All right. And just watch Connor's ability to actually defend the screen. Just enough pressure to make it game-like, right? Runs into the screen. Like, that all makes this drill work. It makes it game-like. And it's very easy for our athletes to now take these skills and these techniques onto the court. Okay. That's what I have for today. And now we can move on to some questions.
I'm coaching a 10-year-old boys team. I have a few players that are showing some potential in our sport. What few things can I do specifically to help a 10-year-old player at this age get to the next level in basketball?
Make it fun. And that's probably like the most challenging thing. You know, we have a junior academy program. We got one up and running in Manitoba the last couple of years, which is great. And we have one in Ontario, BC, and a few of the other provinces. One of the things that, you know, I'm seeing at the age of like 14, 13, even, 12, you get athletes that have already put their 10,000 hours in, and they're walking into the gym and they look like 35-year-old vets that are ready to retire. They don't run to the ball bag, pick up the ball, and just start dribbling with a lot of energy. They kind of sulk into the gym, and they kind of stand in front of you, like looking in your face, like, okay, what are we doing today? Right? You don't want to zap that energy from them too early. So make the games fun. Make the learning of the skills fun. It's the toughest job is that grassroots age, when they're just starting to kind of physically develop, and they're just starting to hone in on wrapping their abilities around performing these skills. The one thing I would say is, when it comes to shooting, if you don't have the ability to lower the rim, this is going to sound weird, but don't have them spend, enormous amounts of time with you standing there watching them take 500 reps of bad technique. Because for every rep that they take, it's probably going to take double to like get them out of that habit and getting them shooting, differently as they grow older. For the most part, young athletes just want to see the ball go in the hole. In our junior academy, for example, we'll do a test of, 5-spot shooting where they just get 5 spots and they take 10 shots, and the athlete wants to see themselves make 7 out of 10, whatever the score is. But our focus and our error detection is all about their fundamentals. What's going on with their feet, their follow through, where's their shot pocket, what are the things that they need to focus on. And with that being said, you still kind of like when they're playing, let them play. Let them play. Like don't, especially at that early age when they have physical limitations, don't overemphasize during gameplay, like, plant your feet, hold your follow through. Just at that age, it's more like great shot, or maybe one more, but try to make it fun for them. What is a good way to develop rebounding at a young age so that it sticks and becomes part of the kid's game as they mature? Ooh, that's a good one. We don't focus on a lot of rebounding until they get a little bit older. But now, by young age, let's say around 15, physically, they're just a little bit, the majority of athletes around that age, at least on the guy side, they're physically like a little bit more agile. They got a little bit more weight. So creating good physical contact, like this is the time where you want to start implementing things like that. First, before you even put the ball off the rim, you have to teach them how to safely engage their opponents physically, right? And a lot of things that like mistakes that you'll see made is like the improper examples of techniques of how to box out. Like they'll put a forearm in the chest, right? And the forearm or the elbow becomes the first point of contact. Might not be a great scenario or a great thing to teach young athletes, because especially if that's what they're doing as they get older, that puts them in some tricky situations. You want to teach them how to create contact with that hip and maybe the back of the arm and the shoulder, right? So they could keep their hands above their head so that they could actually track the ball and get to the ball quicker. A lot of times you'll see guys have the habit of putting their hands behind their back to feel for the defender. So a great drill that I like to do to teach this is the defender literally stands like this, and you put the ball on the floor within a circle. Let's say it's the half court circle. You put the ball on the floor in front of the defender, and then the offensive person is standing behind, and you put like 5 seconds on a stop clock, and that player has to just kind of box the other player out, keeping their hands above their shoulders, using and feeling them with their back and their hips, keeping their legs wide, and they're just shuffling for like 5. Maybe you start off in the beginning for 5 seconds, and as they get better and better, 10 seconds, et cetera, et cetera. And the player who's on offense he can't go between the legs. He has to get around and grab the ball with 2 hands, right? That's a fun drill that I like to use. More questions. Can you share some ways to load ball handling drill to help make a player better passer off the dribble? So I think if they're able to dribble stationary, and then if they're able to move dynamically, like move forward, back, side to side, the best way I've found is to actually, we do fundamental drills every day, and you're working on ball handling. Even in our shooting drills, we're working on ball handling. We're working on ball handling and passing. The more you incorporate those two things, Gordy wasn't joking when he said passing is a lost art. Not enough players work enough on passing. Not enough gyms that I've been to work on passing, right? You might get point guards that are doing it in their individual scenario, but it's one of the lost skills. And great teams, the winning teams, they're usually one of the best passing teams. Okay, but let's say you saw the video, and I'll go back to it here. Where is it with Trey? So remember this video here. So if you're doing a shooting drill and it's a quarter 3, like how many times and this is another pet peeve of mine, is when players shoot, but the coaches are the only ones passing. right? So you just took away a rep of an athlete being able to work on chest pass, bounce pass, left hand pass, right hand, like whatever the pass is. Don't rob the players of reps of learning how to execute passes, and then demand that the passes are on time and on target. But here's a great example of he's driving, right? It's off the dribble. He's reading, hesitating. So he's working right here on his ball handling against a little bit of pressure. He's making a decision where he has to read, right? It's a pass off the bounce, right? On time, on target. Here's a chest pass, right? And a swing, right? On time, on target, and we're shooting. Right. So you could always, like, if your players are having problems executing good passes, then you just got to incorporate it in everything you do. Hopefully that makes sense. Who do you think is the greatest basketball player? Who is the best player you've played with? Who's the best player you played against? Ooh, I'm gonna leave that one for the end. I'm gonna leave that one for the end, but that's a good question. What's the best way to motivate your players to work hard in practice and to put in work outside of practice? You know what? I'll be honest. I'm spoiled. I'm spoiled because when I first started coaching, I was a pro. So if you want to motivate players, I was coaching pros. If you don't want to get paid, don't work, right? So that's pretty easy. And then now I'm working with Canada basketball. So if you're not highly motivated and you're not willing to outwork the next guy, like, this isn't the place for you, because our environment is relentless when it comes to working and achieving. And as our athletes have all gone on to do some great things. But I think a good way to motivate them, and it's part of it is kind of like that nuance, right? Like, really have discussions with your athletes. Like, what are their expectations, right? Well, why do they think they're having difficulty in a scenario? Like, wrap your mind around how they think and how and they'll usually reveal to you like some cues in terms of how to better coach them. Maybe it's yeah, they like drills to be a little bit tougher. Maybe they're a player who likes things to be a little bit easier, right? Maybe it's a player that I was the kind of player, like, I hated playing a one-on-one game and beating somebody 10-0. Like, for me, I was like, no, I didn't want it. I wanted to play the athlete, or play versus the athlete that was beating me 10-0. And then I want to play them again, and then it would be 10-1. And I want to play him again, and then it would be and so on and so forth. Figure out what kind of how your athlete responds to the things that you're asking them to do. If you're not getting positive outcomes, you have to change your approach, right? And that comes down to experience. I'm lucky. I have a black book of some of the best coaches in the world, Gordy being one of them. So when I get stuck in a situation with an athlete, I could always just, go out and ask one of them, but go online, look for new videos, try to keep your finger on the pulse of what's happening in other gyms, But usually today in our environment, our athletes are pretty motivated. I mean, if you talk to any 10-year-old, they should actually be telling you they're going to be the next LeBron James, Steph Curry, Michael Jordan. They should be saying these things, right? And they should think it's possible, because for one of them, they'll get pretty close or they'll surpass it. All right, great question. Best way drills to get kids to value individual and help side defense, as most kids naturally want to shoot and score. Yeah. And here's the thing. I think it's kind of like Gordy mentioned it. I don't know if you listen to Gordy's presentation prior to mine, but you have to understand what your goals and what things lead to success for your team, and for the player. What is the role? What are your expectations? And you have to be able to hold them accountable, excuse me, at all times, right? So if it's a situation that you need them to be in help side, well, they have to be there, or they're not adhering to their role, and they're not putting the team in a situation to be successful, right? And in the end, if they want to play, it's a situation where, if they want to play and win games, they're going to need to adhere to those things, because it's something that you've placed as a foundation of your team's success. With today's next question, with today's game, so much offense is generated off 5-out action, dribble, handoff options. How much emphasis do you put on half-court high school as opposed to scoring off your defense or transition? Gordy mentioned that as well. In today's game, you have to focus on kind of setting the table offensively. What are the concepts that drive your game? What are the measurables, right? Do you want to shoot threes? Do you want, so many rim attempts? Do you want paint touches? Like, what are those indicators that drive your style of play? And I think in today's game, it's a fast-paced game, so transition is definitely important. But you still have to focus on the half court, especially when you get into playing bigger and better teams. Because defensively, they'll know what you're running. They're going to take you out. The game's going to slow down, and you're going to have to be able to execute. At the same time, if they aren't able to do that, for them defensively, they got to be able to stop your transition game first. That's kind of how the game is being played today. A couple more questions here. How do you keep players engaged when their shots aren't falling and they've lost confidence? So there's two things that I do. I have two go-tos. One is, let's say it's a really good shooter, averages and their numbers and percentages are usually pretty high, but they've hit like a little bit of a funk. A lot of people will be like, take more reps, get more reps. I have the opposite approach, especially if there's nothing wrong with their technique, because players are like, they will like get into their own heads and start spiraling down that drain. Like, they will. So you kind of have to find a way to just remove the notion that there's something wrong with them, right? And just shift their focus sometimes. It's kind of like what I said, take a step back and then move forward again. I remember we had a player, Danilo Juricic. He was probably one of our better shooters in age group. Like, he was constantly in the, mid 40s from three, power forward. And he came into one camp and he just couldn't make a three. And the coaches are looking at me like, Mike, you said this guy's a shooter. I'm like, he's a shooter. Leave him alone. Like, let him breathe. And Danilo's like a little bit frustrated. And I see Danilo after practice, going through the reps, like getting the reps up. And then I just kind of like took him aside and said, look, no more. Stop shooting. There's nothing wrong with you. We're just going to go to the free throw line. You're going to shoot 30, right? You're going to focus on your breathing. And then that's all we're going to do today. So at the end of every practice, and it took him about 3 or 4 practices to just focus on free throws, because he's just seeing the ball go in the hole, and he's focusing on breathing. He's not, worrying about his wrist and this and that and misses. Where by the time we got into the tournament, he's back at his 40% usual self. So that's how I kind of look at things, unless there's actually something has changed in their mechanics. But if it's just, shooting for me is a numbers game. Once your technique is at a certain point, it's a numbers game. The best shooters in the world are shooting like mid 40s. If you got 40% on a math test, you'd fail. So we got to kind of keep it realistic and take the pressure off of them in terms of, when things aren't going well. All right.
Mike, we got four left in the queue there, so I'll let you answer those four, and then we'll wrap things up.
Perfect. I'm a volunteer coach and have been coaching for about a year now. I want to shadow under other coaches and learn. Do you have any advice for approaching club university coaches, higher level coaches, and asking to attend practice, etc.? Just do it. Get an email address, call them, especially if you're in shape and you're healthy. If there's any coaches who just stopped playing, it shouldn't be hard for you to get into a gym and volunteer your time. You're not asking for money, even easier. And for my part, most of the coaches that I've been around and that are around our program, they're very welcoming. They're givers. They like to share their knowledge. Right? How important do you feel it is for grassroots coaches to be sharing the things that they do as coaches and practices, games, etc., with each other versus coaches keeping your secrets to yourself? It's a competitive environment, and I think if you have some secret sauce that you think is giving you a competitive edge, by all means. I've been around this game a long time, at least for me, and there's no secrets. You heard Gordy, everything that Gordy said. I've been on the bench with Gordy multiple times. That's what he does. There's no secrets to a shooting drill. There's no magic trick. It's putting in the time, being deliberate with what it is that you're doing, and making sure your athletes know what it is you're asking of them, and you hold them accountable to it. There's no secrets out there. Believe me, there's no magic offense. There's no magic defense. It's about getting 12 players to, all get on the same page and do things to mitigate what their opponents are throwing at them. And last one from Dana. Do the tactics and concepts being used here in Europe influence how you coach? Ooh, wow. I would say yes. And again, I feel like that's a tricky one, because my background is very diverse, growing up in Canada, where I started playing the game, going to the NCAA, where I played for a great coach, being involved with the national team where it's high performance, the best players in the country, and then going to Europe where, again, great coaches, different styles of play. I think it definitely influences me in terms of, one, how important it is to have good coaching at the younger ages. I will always, it's just in me to develop and give back everything that I've learned to, the athletes and the people that are around me. Extremely important. Hopefully that answers your question. Okay, really quickly, I'm going to get to that question. Who do you think is the greatest basketball player of all time? Big MJ fan. Big MJ fan. He just made the game exciting. He was flashy, he was clutch, and he won. The best player you played with? Wow. I mean, the most known player is probably Steve, but I loved my teammates that were in the Olympics in 2000. We grew up together. We grew up playing against each other. We won a lot of games. We had some success. And I had my teams overseas in Europe. I played with a ton of just great players that, maybe people in North America don't know well, but any team that I was on that won a championship was always, important. It takes a lot to win. Not every athlete goes through a career winning championships. I've been fortunate to have won a few. And there's, even the 10th, 11th, and 12th player on teams have been some of my favorite teammates, because they pushed me, motivated me, rebounded for me, helped me become the player that I am. Who's the best player you played against? I always tell people this story of, Tim Duncan. We'd gone we've butted heads a few times in our careers, college, and national teams. But usually if I play a player twice, because of how I develop, just having to seek out the biggest thing in the yard to go up against, um, you know, I always wanted like that revenge match. And there was one summer our national team was in the LA Summer League, and I forget who we were playing against, but Bull Outlaw was on that other team. And usually playing a center and power forward back then, I was either faster or I could, step outside and shoot it or drive by them, or they're too small and I could post them. But I didn't have an answer for that guy, and I never had my rematch. I ran into him a couple times as a coach when we were in Orlando. But that guy, he was just an athlete, high IQ, smart. His motor was relentless. So you just had to be, yeah, on your A game to be able to score against him or stay with him when he was trying to score. Yeah. All right.
Super. This is great, Mike.
There are no more questions.
Appreciate you taking those extra questions there at the end. There was lots that was great insight, including your presentation throughout the last hour and a bit here, hour and a half almost. That's super. We appreciate your time being with us.
I talk too much.
Super Clinic. Maybe not an hour and a half, hour 15. No, we're right on time. We're right on time. But no, we appreciate what you bring to the game, what you brought to our event here today. Love having you here in Winnipeg for all the right reasons of getting the next level worked with and discovered. And we're, of course, looking forward to having you back here in the city.